So Amazon actually added a bunch of great movies to Prime Video right at the beginning of November. Really great movies like Dune Part 1 is the first time it's been on Prime Video, Pan's Labyrinth, Catch Me If You Can, but I'm going to spend time telling you about some of my favorite movies that are lesser known. We've got some hidden gems, some cult classics, and some really funny movies that I think got overlooked. Then I'll tell you about the new stuff coming to Prime later in the month. Thanks to Sundays for Dogs for sponsoring this video, but we're going to start off with a weird action movie titled Cop Shop that was just added on November 1st. This is from director Joe Carnahan, who also did the A-Team movie and is maybe more known for Smokin' Aces, and I would say Cop Shop has a bit in common with Smokin' Aces. Now, this is not all-out action. In fact, it all takes place inside of a police station or a jail, kind of like Assault on Precinct 13, but the characters in this movie are appropriately over the top. Right here you've got actor Toby Huss, who you've seen in a ton of stuff over the years. He's an absolute wild man in this movie. In fact, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't rank this movie nearly as high, but as it stands, it's still a pretty badass Joe Carnahan flick.
Somebody help this man! He's gonna die!
Flash of Genius is a movie that I think was criminally overlooked back in 2008. This is the true story of Robert Kearns, who's played by Greg Kinnear in the movie, and he invented the windshield wiper, and he had to take multiple car manufacturers to court over this because he claimed they stole his idea. They claimed he didn't really come up with the windshield wiper, and it's much more interesting than you would expect. Not just the movie itself, it's a good movie, but like the core concept of why he was right and they were wrong is, again, more interesting than you would think. But you have to watch the whole movie to really get the full picture. Blown Away is one from the mid-90s I have recommended for years. I love this movie. Tommy Lee Jones plays a terrorist, an IRA bomb expert that starts setting off bombs very much like the Unabomber. Jeff Bridges also plays an explosives expert, but he defuses bombs. And for a movie from 1994, it's got a very slick look to it, some really cool cinematography and shots, and a killer soundtrack. There's actually multiple U2 tracks on here that just fit in kind of perfectly with it. It does feel a little bit old-fashioned, but not really for a movie that's 30 years old now. Next up, we've got what I guess you could call a pre-apocalyptic movie. It's Children of Men, a movie I've loved since it came out. I think it is just beautifully directed. Now, it does deal with very grim subject matter. No one can produce babies at all on Earth anymore. In fact, the movie opens up with the death of the youngest person in the world, who I believe was like 20 or so at the time. So the entire planet is just evolving into chaos at the beginning of this story, and then you end up with a pretty incredible journey. It's actually one of my favorite movies Clive Owen has ever been in. As I said, really well directed. There are two sequences in this movie that stand out that were all done as one continuous take, and it's absolutely breathtaking. Gone Baby Gone is another movie that's really well directed. This is actually the first movie from director Ben Affleck, and I think it's still one of his best. This and The Town really go together quite well as two like Boston crime movies. But this does revolve around a missing child, so it can be upsetting, but the story's well told. You get an incredible sort of neo-noir detective movie out of this with just a stellar cast. And then Jacob's Ladder is one I recommend here on the channel all the time. It's incredibly dark, but also just so well directed, and also like surprisingly beautifully directed for a movie that is essentially a 2-hour nightmare. But Jacob's Ladder has become a bit of a cult classic, and like I said, I recommend it here on the channel every time I see it added to a streaming service, but tread lightly. It's a grim one, but for some more cult classics, they just added Run Lola Run. This is from Germany, and because it's on Prime Video, you will have to read subtitles, but my goodness, is this a cool flick from the mid-90s. It looks and feels like the mid-90s. I mean, it's dripping with this like 90s edginess, but it's super fast-paced and a lot of fun. The main character has to come up with a bunch of money very quickly, and the camera just stays with her with this like breakneck pace. It's a pace you've seen replicated in other movies since, but it was very fresh when Run Lola Run came out, and it's still a real gem. They also just added Commando, one of my, I can't say all-time favorite Schwarzenegger movies because he's done so many bangers, but One of my favorite silly movies that he's ever done. This one's just over the top in the true sense of the word. Everything about it is absolutely ridiculous. It is just excess, unhinged. I'm not suggesting that you do a drinking game to this one, but if you were to try to keep up with the kill count in this movie, you're gonna end up in the hospital. I can say that as someone who did try it. I did not end up in the hospital, but it's impossible. The Eiger Sanction is a classic Clint Eastwood movie that I think gets criminally overlooked. You get a couple of things with this movie. One, it's an espionage flick. You get great spy movie stuff, but he's also a mountain climber, and he did most of the rock and mountain climbing you see in the movie. In fact, there are two big sequences that feature a lot of climbing, and it's all done really well. It's shot well, and again, you're seeing Clint Eastwood do most of the work. Now, obviously, there are some stunts mixed in, but for the most part, you're seeing Clint Eastwood do what he's doing. I mean, this movie predates any kind of computer effects that would replace his face. And then kind of an interesting setup, they've got the entire Godfather trilogy. So you've got The Godfather Part 2, those are untouched, but then The Godfather Part 3 is now being added to Prime Video as The Godfather Coda, which is a re-edited version of The Godfather Part 3. Francis Ford Coppola actually did this. He did the re-edit, and not only is it dramatically shorter, like almost an hour shorter, it changes up the order of some things and kind of supposedly tells the story a bit better. I have yet to watch it, but maybe around Thanksgiving or the holidays would be a good time to revisit the Godfather trilogy. I've not watched all three in an incredibly long time. And then from 1997, quite literally the last truly good movie Francis Ford Coppola directed is The Rainmaker. It's also one of Matt Damon's best movies. It's based on a book by John Grisham and just ends up being one of the best courtroom drama movies ever released. And then they're adding back Kingdom of Heaven. The only reason I mention this again, even though it was on Prime Video, I believe last year, is it's an epic period piece, and the movie is quite good, but it's not one of Ridley Scott's best. I do recommend watching it. Again, very, very good movie about the Crusades, but there is a director's cut that is considerably longer and much better. It tells the story better. Some of the stuff they cut out for the theatrical run ends up kind of hamstringing this movie and makes it much less interesting. So even though I do recommend pursuing the version on Prime Video, you could also, on Prime Video, rent the director's cut if you're more interested in the longer, better version. But speaking of better versions, my next pick is one of those comedies that has been criminally overlooked. It's titled Saving Silverman. In this movie, Jack Black and Steve Zahn are trying to get their friend, played by Jason Biggs, to leave his awful, awful girlfriend, played by Amanda Peet, for a woman that's much better for him. Not really that interesting of a setup, but the antics that they get into are fantastic. They actually end up kidnapping Amanda Peet, and as you can imagine, it's Jack Black and Steve Zahn. Like, the whole thing goes to hell. And it's just genuinely like a funny PG-13 comedy. A lot of times I feel like raunchier comedies, which this one is, like for PG-13, Saving Silverman gets pretty raunchy. They often are just not very funny. Saving Silverman is just an exception. It's just a fun, silly movie. If you want something a little more wholesome, you could check out Elizabeth Banks and Walk of Shame. It's got a raunchy concept. She's trying to get home after a one-night stand, but the movie itself is actually fairly wholesome, aside from the fact that she does spend the entire movie in this itty-bitty yellow dress. And then Midnight in Paris. It's just a real gem that I think too many people have overlooked. Owen Wilson stars in this. He's in Paris with his fiancée. Things aren't really going well, so he goes on these long walks at night where something kind of magical happens. He ends up meeting and interacting with famous characters from history like Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Josephine Baker, just to name a few. And it's Woody Allen, so it's got that quirky sort of Woody Allen humor, but it's also Owen Wilson, and he fits into this movie better than you would expect.
Why are you so dressed up?
I was just doing a little writing.
You dress up and put on cologne to write?
Because you know how I think better in the shower and I get the positive ions going in there?
Now, I'm about to tell you about the brand new stuff that they're going to be adding throughout the month, but first, I want to speak to the dog owners watching, because today's sponsor, Sundays, helped extend the life of our dog, Peanut. And that's because Sundays is air-dried dog food that contains 90% human-grade meat, meaning meat that's safe for you and I to eat. The other 10% is vegetables with no synthetic ingredients. And because it's air-dried, you just pour it in the bowl like regular kibble and they gobble it up. If you've used fresh dog food before, you know it can make a mess to prep, and the dogs can make a mess when they eat it, and it can spoil in the fridge relatively quickly. You don't have to worry about any of that with Sundays. And Sundays was such a big help because as Peanut got older, just all of a sudden, the food we had been feeding her forever, food that we thought was good quality food, she just stopped digesting it, and we literally thought her days were numbered. Switching to Sundays fixed that immediately. Not only did she gobble the food up even more, but we could tell that she was putting weight back on instantly. But not only is Sundays better for your dog, they can also help you save money. They ship it directly to your door, so there's no more grocery shopping for dog food, but because it's air-dried, it's shelf-stable. That means Sundays doesn't have extra costs for refrigeration or ice packs to get it to you. They just pass those savings on to you. In fact, Sundays can cost up to 45% less than other fresh dog food brands, but as a big added bonus, my viewers are going to save an extra 50% off that already great price when you go to sundaysfordogs.com/flick. The link is down in the description, or you could just type it in. Again, that's going to get you 50% off your first order with Sundays. Top quality dog food that's already at a great price, so you know you'll be saving money and giving your dog the nutrition they need. It's a great deal on a product I love, but speaking of stuff I love, let's get back to this Prime Video list.
Can we kiss?
No.
What? Can I at least touch my old ass?
Oh my God, you need to be locked up.
For some new releases, on November 7th, they add My Old Ass, which was just in theaters. This stars Aubrey Plaza. She actually plays an older woman, or rather there's a young woman in this movie who imagines her older self coming to talk to her and tell her what her life is going to be like. It's an interesting concept, and I'm a fan of Aubrey Plaza. If you've been a fan of the Citadel action series, it takes place in the near future. They're adding a second spin-off. This one's titled Honey Bunny. And then admittedly, they're not adding a whole lot throughout the month, so we're going to jump all the way to November 19th, where they are adding Abigail, a movie I consider to be one of the top horror movies of 2024, or at least it made it into my top 10. In this movie, you follow a group of bandits, let's say. They don't know each other, and they're at a meeting place after a crime has taken place, very much like Reservoir Dogs. But they kidnapped a little girl, and while they're babysitting her, not only do they realize this is not a little girl, they realize that they've been tricked and they are all now victims. They're trapped in this house with this thing. That is the basic setup. You get that from the trailer. This is not a spoiler. This ends up being a wild, fun ride. Now, while it is funny and fun, like I said, it's not quite a horror comedy, but it's got a lot of clever moments in it, and you could just tell that the directors and really the whole cast had a lot of fun making this movie. On the 22nd, they're adding The Meg, another fun movie, but just, in my opinion, not really worth multiple watches. And then on the 24th, a movie for the family that is worth multiple watches, they're adding Coraline. I realize this movie has some years on it, but people were clamoring for it back around Halloween, even though this one's pretty appropriate year-round. If you've got kids that are, I'd say, ages 6 and up, this is a really good movie done in the vein of The Nightmare Before Christmas, but it also teaches some valuable lessons about being happy with what you have in life. Thanks again to Sundays for sponsoring another video. Don't forget to check out their link down in the video description, or just type this one in if you want to give your dog some better nutrition. But I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Prime Video episode, and you will see me on the next one.